That was the settlement. Partitioned Ireland in the south with the status of the Dominions, Canada or Australia. 2 states. One, the small one in the north, governed by the Protestants. The other, an independent Irish Free State in the south, governed by the Nationalists. And De Valera obviously blinked from bringing back this to the Republicans, because he knew there'd be a split. The more extreme ones would want to fight on. There'd be talk of sellout. And in August, he persuaded Collins, whom he had wanted to keep from any photography earlier in the summer, to go effectively as the leader of the delegation who had to negotiate this settlement and bring back the poison chalice. Just think, the people he negotiated with in the treaty negotiations were so eminent in their day that Winston Churchill was only number 4 on the British team. People like Birkenhead and Lloyd George were there, and they accounted him their equal.
During his stay in London, Collins was lionised by fashionable society. He was taken up by Hazel Lavery, the wife of the painter Sir John Lavery. Her portrait was later to adorn Irish banknotes, and you can still find her on the watermark. It was widely thought at the time that Collins and Lady Lavery were having an affair, although there's no proof.
I don't know whether he had a sexual relationship with Lady Lavery. I suspect he possibly didn't. I expect that was an older woman obsessed with this. The obsession was on her side in a way, you know, but I mean, it seems that he does have, he did have other, you know, kind of dalliances in his life.
The one woman man but does reinforce an idea of sort of fidelity to a cause, doesn't it? Fidelity to a woman, fidelity to a cause.
Perhaps, but I mean, I would have loved actually to have him, you know, to have him surrounded by women in different ways. I would love to have him sleeping in other beds besides Harry Boland's, you know what I mean? But there was a kind of a, what I did like about the triangular thing was that it was almost like these two men were in love with each other in a way, you know, or were obsessed with each other.
The triangular relationship in the film is real. Michael Collins and his best friend Harry Boland were in love with the same woman, whom they met while electioneering in County Longford. Her name was Kitty Kiernan.
Oh, you want to hear this?
How are you? Shouldn't I tell you he snores?
Nick, how are you? You remember Kitty?
Indeed I do. How are you, Kitty? Do you remember me?
Vaguely.
All right. I know when I'm not wanted.
See you.
I did write a section involving Collins in London, you know, involving Collins, you know, meeting Lady Lavery, getting his portrait painted by Sir John Lavery, and getting, you know, meeting Lloyd George, some relationship between himself and Birkenhead emerging, you know, that kind of thing. But that sequence did nothing to illuminate the actual, you know, the details of the treaty negotiations.
He did not have De Valera's slippery political cunning. You know, Lloyd George famously said negotiating with Eamon De Valera was like trying to pick up mercury with a fork. He did not have that. He'd walked into a trap, and in the negotiations he realized that, and he used to say to his fellow delegates when the British weren't around, you know, that long hair has got me. And he walked into a trap. He knew when he'd signed the treaty, as he said in the famous letter, he'd signed his death warrant.
The terms of the treaty that Collins and the other delegates signed were less than De Valera had wanted, but were possibly as good as anyone could have achieved.
People shy away from talking about the treaty, like the Civil War, which was the product of the treaty. It's never discussed. There are almost no books about it. It's a buried part of Irish history because it's something that people can't bear to look at.
The border never changed by 1 millimetre, well, it was very tiny cosmetic changes from Collins' estate to ours. So that was a given, that was a reality. Instead of facing that reality, they fought over the oath. It was very much like the Dean Swift Civil War that was fought over which end of the egg should be topped, the big end or the little end. It was about as useless a war as that, and it poisoned Irish life for decades afterwards.
I would plead with every person here. Make me a scapegoat, if you will. Call me a traitor, if you will. But please, let's save the country. The alternative to this treaty is a war which nobody in this gathering can even contemplate.
The country split. De Valera walked out of the Irish Parliament. An election was called with Collins on the pro-treaty side and De Valera heading the anti-treaty side. The Irish people voted heavily in favour of the treaty, but the anti-treaty side refused to accept the result. A vicious civil war ensued. Collins and the Irish government, with weapons supplied by the British, were fighting their former colleagues in the IRA. The Civil War is very much a skeleton in a cupboard in Ireland, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yes.
You rattled it, because the Irish don't like to admit to themselves, and why should they, that in the killings that have gone on since 1960, more Irish have killed Irish than British have killed Irish.
Well, more people died in the Civil War than the entire War of Independence, you know.
Yeah.
They battled that out brutally with somewhere around the region of 4,000 deaths, which is more in a shorter time with less modern weaponry than we have had in 25 years. There are songs about the hatred for the British and about imperialist rule, but there are very few songs ever publicly sung about the Civil War. So homogeneous Ireland now has elevated its common enemy to, if you like, paper over its own divisions.
There's the famous image of Collins striding across the parade ground at Portobello with a revolver loosely strapped to his leg. And this is the most popular and best-selling image, I'm told. In a way, it's not seen as being an image of a civil war general in the process of prosecuting a war against his brother revolutionaries, as it were, and his fellow countrymen. I think that image of the swaggering gunman is very often projected back onto the good war, if you wish, against the British. It denies the Civil War. There's a popular amnesia about the Civil War, and still a glorification of the revolutionary violence, which almost inevitably, I would argue, led to civil war and destroyed the positive dynamic of the revolution, which Collins symbolises.
In 1922, Collins went back for a tour of his old country in West Cork, which was still a stronghold of the anti-treaty faction. Collins' motorcade was ambushed and Collins was shot in the head. He died immediately. He was 31 years old. His rival, De Valera, had stayed the night before in a farmhouse only a few hundred yards away from the site of the ambush.
De Valera's responsibility for Collins' death lies in the fact that he helped to create the overall situation of civil war, which led directly to Collins' death. But it is utterly untrue to say that he was physically present or that he had anything to do with the shooting. He in fact tried to prevent the ambush. He thought that he could again impose his will on Collins if he got talking to him man to man in Collins' own country. He said that if he could talk to Collins down in Cork, away from his people in Dublin, he would be able to work his charisma on him, just as he had done sending him to the treaty. And it's not true to say that he had any hand, act or part in the shooting.
I don't want to say that De Valera had anything to do with the planning of the assassination of Michael Collins. And I have taken, they're the greatest liberties with historical fact I've taken in the screenplay. The circumstances surrounding.
You see De Valera the night before,
Yes.
weeping,
Yes.
because he has heard Collins' passionate pronouncement that he wants to meet De Valera to settle it. The death of their mutual friend Boland has just taken. I think it's too far. It's time this was settled.
Yes, basically, yeah. No, I mean, I'm not saying that attempted meeting or that kind of. I'm not saying De Valera was ever in a close enough proximity to hear anything that Collins said, but I mean, dramatically for me, it made no. I had to bring those two protagonists together towards the end. In other words, I had to have one case made to the other man. Do you understand what I mean? I had to have Collins' words in some way reach De Valera, and as it's a movie and a dramatic reconstruction, the only way to do that is to have him overhear him, in a way, you know.
Tell him I'm sorry I didn't bring back the Republic. But nobody could have. He was my chief always. I would have followed him to hell if he'd asked me. And maybe I did.
And I show this young go-between, kind of skipping between one and the other, De Valera wandering off, not being able to say anything to Collins, and then the young go-between saying, look, he says he'll meet you tomorrow, you know. Now that is my invention, and I don't mean to imply that De Valera had anything to do with the assassination, and I don't think the movie does imply that. It shows, you know, two men at the end of their tether, really, you know, both wanting it to stop, not knowing how to bring that about, you know.
So I take it you heard?
Jesus, Mick. God forgive us, Harry.
Have you got any reply? He's come all this way. Be kind of rude not to give him an answer.